Welcome back, everybody, to the Growing Band Director podcast. I'm here with my friend Trent Austin. This is episode 79. Trent of Austin Custom Brass. And dude, it's really nice to see you. We've been talking Red Sox. Tell us more about the Red Sox. Where are we at these days?
I can't do that. Everybody would turn off the podcast instantly. They'd be in a state of terror and almost depression, I think, maybe. I don't know. So it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you're in Kansas City, but you're a Maine guy and a Boston guy. But
I'll always be a Mainer.
Yeah,
always be a Mainer.
A Mainer.
Yes, Region Grove, absolutely. I grew up there in Central Maine there, and my family's from the coast. So no, I very much miss the ocean, and I miss seafood, and I miss my Boston sports teams and all my musical colleagues. But I've been living here in Kansas City for 5 years now, which is kind of scary.
And you got the barbecue, though.
So. We have the barbecue. Yeah. We have the coffee. No, we have. I'm not a Chiefs fan, but I guess we have a pretty good football team. But
yeah, we'll move on. We'll move on from those. Yeah,
that's right. You can delete that in the podcast. Boom, that is now deleted. So,
So I want to hear the story about how you got to Kansas City. Let's not go back to the beginning. Let's start with you were in Boston. Where was your shop in Boston again?
My shop in Boston was in Reading, so like a little bit north of the city, just because I couldn't afford the rent of Boston itself. Yep. We started the shop. Well, let me go backwards, I guess, a little bit. I had bought and sold horns for my students. I taught college at USM, University of Southern Maine, I think for about 9 years, and then I would always try to find horns for my students because often they would be, it would be really hard challenge for them to find affordable instruments. And then I would fix them up in my basement at my house, clean them up, align the valves, and then, make a few bucks and get the student a really good horn. My earphones are not staying in my ear. So this is the earphones.
You were not given a perfectly shaped ear.
Oh man, I got so many issues today. So this is the problem with the podcast. So I was always doing that. I was buying horns, flipping them, and in the process, I learned a lot about instruments. And my students got really good instruments for a fair price.
Yep.
I became a performing artist for this company, Adams, which is based in the Netherlands. Hopefully, a lot of you band directors have Adams percussion, and hopefully more of you will get Adams brass because it's fantastic. And I worked a Midwest band clinic for them, just work in the booth, sold a bunch of horns for them. They're like, wow, you're really good at that. You should open a shop. And I was like, nah, I don't want to do that. And they said, well, we'll give you exclusive on our brass line for the United States for 3 years. And I said, okay, I'll open the shop. So they sort of forced me into the business. And now it's kind of crazy.
So tell us about the business for people who are like normal band directors and they only deal with, music and arts and whatever other sort of retailer. Like, what do you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, music and arts is great. They provide an amazing service to the bulk of the people that need musical gear. Like you need guitar or whatever, you need a student clarinet, you go there. We are a pro shop. We deal with very custom fittings for players. We had someone actually this morning that flew in from Memphis to buy a trumpet. So they flew in, they stayed overnight, they came to our shop this morning, and they left with actually a new Adams, actually. And we have other people testing. I'm not sure you can hear them, but we have other people testing here in the shop right now. So versus like a traditional, let's say a music and arts where they might have 10 trumpets in their store, like a beginner or an intermediate, and then like a couple professional models. We have 400 or 500 in the shop right now. all levels, from the basic $200 horn to, we just sold a horn last week for $17,000, a trumpet.
Well,
So yeah,
what do you do any work with schools? Are there any schools who?
we do.
Yeah.
We do school bids, we do government bids, we do purchase orders, and all of the things. The only difference between us and a traditional, like a road rep music store, like a Music and Arts, is that we're not like a built-in sales funnel that like a lot of those music stores are, and it's just, it makes sense, like you get your rental from that company, and then when it's time to upgrade, you're going to go to that company because you know that company. We have to work a lot harder for our business, I think. And we have to continually put our product out online and hustle. I mean, it's just like, band directors are the epitome of hustle. That's like that's like all you all do is like, see, I'm now saying y'all. I mean, I don't know, man. I'm eating barbecue and saying y'all. This is wrong. Yeah, but it's right. Barbecue is always right. But so we have to work harder on, gaining transactions and establishing trust and, security in, our customer base, I think. But once we get them, I think we then get deeply passionate, lifelong supporters of our business.
That's great. That's great.
Thanks, man.
Well, you were in Maine, was it last year, right? When we did COVID,
Yes, I was in
COVID Jazz Festival.
Yes, yeah. That's right. I directed the thanks to you, I directed the All-State Jazz Ensemble, which I was a student in back in that was a blast, man. Even with the COVID protocols, and it was great because we were doing it and it hadn't been done in so long, and it was great for people being safe, because I've had COVID at least 2 times, I know right now. Probably 3 or 4 times. Yay. Yeah, and it was cold. I remember it was it was cold in Bangor.
It's always cold
from Maine because I said Bangor right.
Yeah. So, and you grew up not too far from there. The first time I remember meeting you was at UNH in April of '97. Because that would have been your senior year, right?
Yep.
And I was a prospective student, so I came in and sat in, and Nick Orvich was doing the Wind Symphony at the time. And awesome. I remember coming in and being like, I was one of the best players in high school in Maine and all that. And then I remember coming in, and you were one of the people who sold me on it. You didn't even know that, but I came and I sat last chair, right? And I don't even remember what the heck piece you guys were playing. But of course it was like, yeah, grab your horn and sit in. Of course, I was used to being able to play everything. And then, man, I played like 1 out of every 4 notes, right? But I remember hearing you playing Principal. And again, I don't remember what it was, but I knew you were leaving, right? But I looked around and I said, wow, I feel like the worst musician in this room. This is where I need to be. And that's what really sold me on going to UNH, is because there was quality players there, and I knew I wasn't just going to walk in and be the top person there.
Well, I'm going to give you an addendum to your story, because you weren't the worst musician in the room, because I remember hearing you when you were playing, you played Nutville with the South Portland Jazz Band when Maynard was giving a master class. I think you guys opened for him, right?
Yep.
And you killed it. I do remember you turned about the same shade as your hat. And you were playing like a King Liberty or something, some Silvertone or something.
Yep.
This is a terrible disease. I don't remember people's names, but I remember what they were playing for instruments. It's like, oh yeah, man, you played blah blah blah. And you sounded great back then. And it's like, so you got to give yourself more credit. I know what you're doing. You're being humble and you're being kind, but it is one of these things where, I had a similar experience when I went to UNH when I auditioned. I remember sitting in with the jazz band, and I was like, oh, everybody can hear, everybody in this band can read, and I could not read music. I was taught like by listening. I grew I'll give you a little backstory for people. I went to Nokomis High School, an amazing three-tiered teaching system there with Jack Clifford, who has passed away. He was my middle school band director. I mean, my elementary school band director. Bruce Brown, who's like my hero because he played trumpet, and he still does. And he was my middle school, junior high band director. And then Stan Buchanan was the high school band director. And he was one of the traditional, like old school Maine tyrant, sort of like, curmudgeon-y dudes who continuously nailed like you to play 3 songs because he was a bowling trophy guy, and he had to be because that was the way he justified his program financially, because it was a very depressed economic area. It was better when I was there, but then once a lot of the industries closed down and moved, there was not much income. So, but anyways, that was not really here, we're going to sight read today. We didn't really sight read at all. You got your music, you played your music, you worked on your music. So when I got to UNH and I had to sight read, it was like freaky. I mean, that was so bad. But thankful for the instructors at UNH who were kind enough to like deal with me and cultivate that with me, force me to do it. So nowadays I'm a pretty decent sight reader now, but like back in the day I couldn't read anything. So
yeah. So, and when you got to UNH, obviously one of the best things about UNH is the Clark Terry Jazz Festival. So
absolutely.
So let's talk about Clark a little bit. The connection. What is the legacy? Clark passed in February of 2015, I believe.
Yes.
What is the legacy that Clark has left us?
Well, Clark. I mean, I will say, just in a trumpet world, Clark has the best actual trumpet setup I've ever seen. So any student who struggles with the instrument, and any people who are out there who might have struggling brass students, sit them in front of a YouTube video of Clark playing and say, watch this and emulate how he plays, because it is the most effortless, controlled setup. So that's okay. As a trumpet player, he's unmatched. I mean, the best compliment I can ever give a musician is that I can tell them in a few notes.
Yep.
And that could be Renee Fleming, that could be Yo-Yo Ma, that could be, Eric Clapton, it could be, it could be Axl Rose. I mean, it doesn't necessarily matter where you're going, but you could tell Clark's playing, regardless of the time period, even when he was young and still searching for his sound, you could tell his playing in 20 seconds, 10 seconds. So besides the Titanic musicianship, Clark was an incredible educator. He had a great knack of making you feel comfortable, making you feel like you were part of his band and his ensemble. So it could be the saddest, weakest middle school jazz band you've ever heard in your life, and Clark would make them swing. That's like a huge ability that I see. Sometimes I see guest artists like Clark who out there today who can't do that. Clark had that ability to do that. And it's unbelievable. And it's something that, when I do those things, I try to aspire to, and I can't do, but it's amazing how Clark could do that. Besides his amazing, tireless work on the road. I mean, he told me one year in the 70s, I think it was, he did 275 dates on the road. Like schools. Like he was going school. He created the Nokomis Jazz program. He played a concert in 1980, and it changed everybody's perspective of like what this was, and everybody was excited, and the entire level from one night. That's the power of such a incredible artist.
Because he was insistent that jazz is an oral language, which of course it is. So you know he
Yes.
knew you had to be there and teach it 1-on-1 or 1-on-10 or whatever it is in order. So that traveling part is a huge bit of that.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, it's intense how much of a road rat he was. So when I went to UNH, part of the reason I did accept my offer at UNH was the fact that at the time when I was there in '93, he was still doing 2 weeks a semester, 2 weeks. And so part of the cool thing at UNH that I got to do was sort of be like his valet, where you would take him back and forth to the hotel every night. You would have dinner with him, and then what happened after that is like he didn't want to be in his hotel room alone. He didn't want to hang out alone. He's like, come and hang with me. So I would bring my horn and I'd sit in his room, and sometimes he's on the phone, he's talking and he's doing stuff. Sometimes he's like, writing cards. He used to send me postcards when I was young, like even in high school, he sent me some postcards. I met him in '92 before I went to UNH. But anyways,
So
and
sitting
then it
in
was just hang.
so sitting and hanging. I remember. So he would do master classes too with the trumpet section when you were there. I remember sitting and learning. I don't want to be kissed by anyone but you. And having him just teach it to us. Now that tune isn't the hardest tune ever, but it's not the easiest tune ever either. And I remember wait, we're not getting music to this, and Clark Terry's in front of us, and we better get it. So I just remember that, learning by ear over and over and over again. And I still know that tune to this day just because of that experience.
Well, yeah, we don't remember how we learned how to talk, right? I mean, if you do, you have this unbelievably, Benjamin Button sort of like experience. I don't know, maybe going backwards in life. I don't know. But we don't remember how it was to learn how to talk. I think in a musical context, in an improvisatory context, it's the same thing. You could buy every great book on jazz improvisation. I mean, there's tons of incredible texts. One of my favorite texts out there especially for music educators, is Hal Crook's book, Ready, Aim, Improvise. It's a great book. And it's, especially if you don't have a lot of skill in terms of like, I've never conducted a jazz improv class, or I've never worked with a combo. It's a wonderful text on formulating exercises and getting students ready to play, ready for the endeavor of improvising. So I think that's a really great resource. By the way, Hal Crook got a lot of his start with Clark when he was young. So I mean, that's not a coincidence.
Right.
So this sort of style of teaching, and Clark, in addition to his educator, in addition to his playing, Clark was the nicest man I've ever met. And he would do anything for someone that he respected and liked. And he did so many great things for me throughout my life and my career. He got me my first endorsement deal with an instrument company. He just walked up to the owner of the company and goes, "That guy can play, get him a horn." I didn't ask for it. I didn't ask for it. He's like, "You like it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I like it." And, he goes, so he walked up and he literally just did that. And I was like, and then they're like, after Clark left, they go, "Well, we can't say no to Clark Terry." So, I was very fortunate.
I was listening to a podcast recently, Music Ed Insights, and they had Bob Washut on, director of jazz studies from, I think it was Iowa for a long time. Anyway, and the quote he used, I'm like, that's a Clark Terry quote. He was talking about, they said, so the biggest thing you're saying is imitate, assimilate, innovate, right?
Yep.
Clark always used to say that. Can we discuss that a little bit? Because those are a lot of eights.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. I will say, Clark, that is one of Clark's beacons, right? We think of Clark as being that was his mantra, right? But I will say, Clark didn't really want people all the time copying. So it's I'm going to go against the grain a little bit in this thing, because who did Clark Terry copy? Name me a trumpet player. You could say Louis Armstrong,
But
you
not
could say Roy Eldridge a
well.
little bit, but he never sounded like Louis Armstrong or Roy Eldridge.
What about when
So
What about when he was really young and he was just learning that language?
he
He
still
didn't.
didn't. He
Wow.
still didn't. I mean, he's a beautiful example of someone who didn't really fit in the stylistic box. He served in the service bands, and so he moved to New York right after the service bands, late, I want to say mid to late 40s. So even when he was playing, like he was in a trumpet section in the Charlie Barnett Orchestra. This trumpet section was Clark Terry, Maynard Ferguson, Doc Severinsen, and Charlie Shavers. So like crazy Titanic trumpet section. But he, even then, when he was formulating his early sounds, and you listen to some of the early MRC recordings of him and the early like Rudy Van Gelder things, he doesn't sound like, he just sounds like Clark. It's very interesting. So the mantra of imitate, emulate or assimilate, and innovate. Yes, that still is super important. I think the imitative stage when you're really young is important, but only on like a grammatical level, right?
Right.
We're talking like, how now brown cow. That's how he used to try to teach you how to play plunger, right? You would quote Shakespeare all the time, but it gets to the point where when you have a developing student who is not necessarily fitting in a box, that's when you have to almost go, well, do I need them to like really play a Louis Armstrong solo? I think they should acknowledge a Louis Armstrong solo. They should respect that, but then instantly try to find their own concept. Ornette Coleman, when he would like do sound checks, he would play Charlie Parker solos. So it is one of these things that we do come from tradition. And one of my favorite trumpet players can imitate anybody, and you would not expect them. But Ambrose Akamusare can literally play like Louis Armstrong if you wanted. Wow. He could play like Clark Terry. He could play like Clifford Brown. He knows the history. He respects the history, but he is genuinely a total stylist in his own regard. So I have a little bit of trepidation when people always say this is Clark Terry, and I'm almost certain that Clark didn't necessarily mean it in a literal sense, where like in the emulative or assimilative stage where you have, like, say you're playing a solo on I Don't Want to Be Kissed, and you take Miles's transcription and you have it on your stand and you're trying to play it, like that's cool and all, but Miles did it. So like, what are you trying to say as a creative musician? And I think some people in education, like with the younger students, get scared of that. They're like, no, but we've got to make sure they do it this way. I was like, no, I think you could do both. The European standard of teaching improvisation is so different than the Americanized standard, the Berkeley, the New School, the Aebersold sort of traditions, which are all valid. That's how I grew up. I learned that way. I'm thankful for it. But in some ways, I would have liked to just pick up my horn and play and not necessarily think, oh, well, this is a polydodecaphonic 27 chord, So, I was like,
so are you saying that forgive me, that the European way is more of a by ear melodic way?
I would say that the European, it's a mix, because now they've changed too. So now they've changed a little bit in terms of, they're now getting more book savvy and things like this. But I would say like in you're talking 60s and 70s, it was different. It was very different, I think. I don't know which way is right. I think a combination is right, just like anything else.
One thing that was cool about being with Clark is like being with somebody who was with everybody.
Absolutely.
like the Miles Davis stories that he had, like just with somebody who was with all these people, and I like Miles as much as everybody else. And but he was someone who was always changing his sound and changing his approach. Whereas Clark, in my view, like he always sounded like Clark from 1940 to 2010.
Yeah, and if you want to dig real deep, you could say the exact same thing about Miles. It's just everything around him changed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Miles was still sounding like Miles when he was struggling playing with Bird in 1948. And he still sounds like Miles when he's playing, tutu with electronic instruments and playing over a click tracks. So, the original kernel stays the same and everything around it changes. You could say that with a lot of great artists. You could say that with a guy like Herbie Hancock, a guy like, or someone like Stevie Wonder, or even someone like Paul McCartney, like where, it's still Paul McCartney, but, it's not Paul McCartney Wings, and it's not, Revolver album. It's like, it's very different.
What was great about Clark is, in addition to being amazing as a musician, as a jazz musician, the educator, and we've talked a lot about that already. But I have a story from Alan King. Alan King here in Maine, right?
Yes.
One of the finest trumpet teachers, brass teachers, I should say. And he has a story. So I'm plagiarizing the story, but there was a jazz all-state that he was at and he was watching, and the person conducting couldn't get the drummer to play 3/4 in swing. Like it was just not happening. He had been going at it for half an hour already, couldn't do anything. And apparently Clark walked in the room and he heard 2 notes and he went up to the conductor and Clark said, do you mind if I try something? So the guy's like, well, of course, go ahead. You're Clark Terry. And he walked over him and he said, this is how you play 3/4 drums. He goes, you park the car, he parks the car, she parks the car, you park the car. Can you play that? So then the drummer goes, it's like, there you go.
Right.
He just did it
super fast.
And the conductor, who I don't know who it was, but I'm sure was an expert in teaching, goes,
right.
Wow, I just got a masterclass on how to fix that.
Yes.
Man.
I mean, that is, like you listen to Clark Terry's story, he didn't grow up in a musical educational context that we grew up in. Like especially the early story of him getting his first instrument, right?
Yeah, let's tell that story. Tell that story. I love that story.
So the best that I hope I don't destroy it, but he was grew up in a very impoverished area. His father had left, early on in his life, and he wanted to play a brass instrument. He had this affinity for the sound and the power and the that sort of energy that an instrument like the trumpet can produce, right? But he couldn't afford a trumpet. So he went to a junkyard and started putting all these parts together, like pipes and hoses, and he created something. And
so there was a funnel on the end. There was a funnel as the bell, right? Yeah.
And he said it was such a horrendous sound. He would go home and he'd buzz into it, and maybe this is why he has such a great setup, because he played such a terrible instrument to start, sort of like the weighted bat syndrome in baseball. I don't know. It was so bad and so horrendous that everybody in his neighborhood pitched in to buy him a trumpet because they couldn't stand the sound of that instrument. So
it's amazing.
I think that's just an awesome story. So, that's that persistence and that sort of drive. I don't know about you, but I knew when I was probably 12 or 13 years old, I wanted to play trumpet, as a primary way to live, and I was up and I practiced a couple hours this morning before I went to work. So, the trumpet is still a very deep, it's obviously an integral part of my daily life and my business, of course. But, that's that inspiration. And, it's the inspiration level. Like Clark, Clark was always the, that phrase, you could talk the talk, but you better walk the walk. And man, he would talk, but man, he would run. He wouldn't even walk, even when he was in a wheelchair and he couldn't walk. We think we would be in band and we would be thinking we were the swinginest cats out there, and we were sad. And he would play 2 notes, boo da, and it's oh shoot,
I'm done.
Okay, right?
Yeah.
And it was just like the beautiful thing of how he taught. I think like it was a real fine line of being like good cop, bad cop all the time, I think too, where it was like it was all out of love, but like, at least for me, there were times when we were in the room privately where he was yell at me. He'd be like, yeah, that's sad. You can't do that. That's terrible. But like, even in rehearsals, he'd almost get to the point where you feel like a little uncomfortable, like, oh, wow. And then he'd bring you right back up. So it's and I think in today's world, we can't do that at all. I think a lot of people are more sensitive to criticism. We're not open to like, having someone dress us down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And which is sad because it's like, I mean, I don't need to have the old school way of people throwing batons at you or the like,
Yep.
storming off or things like that. No whiplash thing. Thank goodness I have never seen that movie. But, but there is that line, on how to read students. And Clark could read people really well. He could read like the real sensitive people in the band, but always make them feel better, which I think is really cool. Now it's not necessarily the drummer or the lead trumpet player or the first tenor player, the stars of the band. He was like, sometimes it's the third trombonist that he would like grab and raise up, and it was like, it's super hip, team, super hip.
A couple stories from Clark Terry's near the end of his life, at least personal stories. I remember when he had cancer, right? And he missed some time when I was in school. So he came back to this concert and, huge applause, and he had lost hair and, but he's in a wheelchair and they wheel him out. And the first thing he says, he takes the microphone and he says, man, I got to tell you, the golden years, they suck.
Yep. Yeah, that was his intro line for the last maybe 10 or 15 years of his life.
Yep.
The amazing. Okay, I'll tell you a story. We went on his 94th birthday. A lot of, people that played in his band in the 70s or played in his small group later on, or like people like myself who were, he was a mentor to us. We all flew down to his house in Pine Bluff, and we had a big band for him, and he was, he passed away 2 months later, I think. And so he was very, very, very frail, very ill. He had no, it was very hard. I'll say that, to see him that way. And he was sleeping most of the day. So most of it was just for us, right? We were all there, reconnecting, having fun, playing the music and he would come out. They would wheel him out into his living room and he would, listen. The educator was still in him, because I remember we were playing one song and he like waves his arms and we're all like, what? And he goes, you all aren't playing that right. It's right. And he started singing. And we're all like, here's a guy who's, he's on heaven's door, right?
Yeah.
Can barely breathe, who just like literally, perked up like incredibly. But it was that thing about, like, this is my passion, and I don't know if he ever thought, like, when he was 30 years old, for instance, I'm sure he never thought he was going to be an educator like that. He was recording, he was doing 6 jingles a day. He was playing with Ellington's band. I mean, like, like, you're not thinking, like, one day I'm going to, get all these doctorates from all these universities and influence, gosh, I don't even, tens of thousands of people, that's power. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about his legacy, is that, all of his children, and you're one of Clark's children too, we have this ability to connect a little bit differently than if we didn't have that opportunity working with him. So that's the gift that he gave us, which is just so precious.
And I was told that he was the first one on the Ellington band and the Basie band. Is that true?
He was the first person who did both.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's only been a few, like Louis Belson, um, Quentin Jackson, maybe. Like there haven't been many, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So that's it's pretty amazing.
And then he was also I think was the first black musician on the payroll at NBC, or the first black
Yes,
person.
he was the Jackie Robinson of the studio orchestra world, and he told me that he didn't miss a note in that studio orchestra for 9 years.
Wow.
9 years. And so I actually had the opportunity to study with someone who lived out in Massachusetts, who lived in Swampscott. Oh, no, Nahant. Sorry. That an island outside of Boston, who was in the studio orchestra playing trumpet with Clark. And so I asked him that. I asked Bob, his name was Bob McCoy. And I asked him, I was like, was he serious about that? And Bob goes, Clark didn't miss a single note ever. I did not hear it. And he goes, he was the most perfect musician in that group. And, he said because he was black, people said, oh, you're not going to be able to read, you're going to keep screwing up. We're going to have to take all these takes. That the classic, deep racist impression of what a musician is, and he did just the opposite, but he had to. He said, I had to be perfect. I had to be perfect because otherwise it was going to give them a scapegoat to fire me. Mm-hmm. So it's intense.
And you tell a story about going to his house when he was later on in his years, and you walk in and he's back there playing Clark Study Number 2 or something like that.
So this is like, the reason why I'm genuinely excited and like just so energized to practice every day, because it was probably, I want to say 98, 99. So he was, so let's see, he was born in 1920, right? So what, 79, 80 years old, right? And he had just had his first major laser eye surgery. And he calls me. He's like, hey, man, you want to come hang out? Gwen's out of town and I could use someone to help. And I was like, yeah, you were asking me to go hang out with you? Sure. So I got in my car and I drove from Boston to Long Island. And I open up the door, and I'm a Clark freak. I have so many recordings of him. I've studied his music. I transcribed his solos, like he's a huge part of my life. And I'm like listening, and I hear this harmon mute, and I'm like, that doesn't really sound like any of those recordings. Oh, maybe this is a new import. I don't know. So I go into the kitchen, and there's Clark in his bathrobe. He's got a toothpick hanging out of his side. He always did that. He played with a toothpick hanging out, which means his embouchure center is so strong and so well formed. But I don't recommend anybody putting a toothpick in their mouth and playing trumpet. Okay, but I digress. So he's playing. He's not supposed to be playing because he had just had laser surgery. But I said to him, I was like, Clark, man, what are you doing practicing? It's like you've played with everybody. And I start naming the names, because it's out of reverence. Like you play with Ella, you play with Dizzy, you play with, all these people. It's like, why are you practicing? And he looks at me and he's dead serious. He goes, because I'm still learning. And I'm like, crap. Here I am, the 25-year-old cocky, like hot shot trumpet player, right? And I'm like, this guy who's 80 years old is telling me this. I'm like, oh, and I got depressed. And he goes, let's practice together. And that's all we did the whole weekend. We ate barbecue and we practiced. So
that's awesome.
And we listened. He'd turn on videos of him playing. He's like, have you ever seen this video? This is a good one. And pull out the video of his big band when they were in Sweden, or take out a combo with him and Dizzy. And I'm like, holy cow, so it was pretty cool. But yeah.
There's a full concert recording on YouTube of him and Oscar Peterson Trio.
Yes.
In what country is that in? I forget.
I think it's either Norway or Sweden. It was 1965 or 1966.
It's so good.
They are not holding any bars. They're throwing down. Clark sounds absolutely magnificent on that, and the whole group, of course.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So let's conclude with a little bit of jazz improvisation talk.
Sure.
I remember taken a lesson from you a long time ago, and you started talking to me about chromatic approach tones. And
Sure.
it was the first time I had heard it. So I'm sure there are some band directors or people listening who have not heard about it. So if people are understanding how to play over chord changes in a basic way, but how do you get like some chromaticism into your solo, right? And there's a basic way to start, and then lots of things you can do on top of it to build that. So let's just go on that. What is a chromatic approach tone, and how do you use it?
Yeah, so I think what happens is, especially the people that are in, like I said, that Ebersol sort of world where are the white notes the right notes or the black notes the right notes? You know, when you would see the scale chart and they'd be separated, you know, like, so sometimes we feel like, you know, we're locked in by chord tones. A lot of times when I hear younger ensembles, especially improvisers play, they're holding on to those chord tones for dear, like dear life, like it's their life preserver, and they're not going to drown. But one of the first things about freedom of an improviser is the ability to just sort of weave in and out of the right note and the wrong note. Because, you know, what did Miles Davis say? He didn't say there were no wrong notes. He said, do not fear mistakes because there are none. You know, and that's a classic Miles thing. He would screw up and he'd play the same note 4 times. And then eventually people started playing the melody that way because they were like, well, that's the way Miles played it. There are many tunes you call on jam sessions that you have to say, are we playing the right changes or are we playing the Miles changes? Which is like, that's power too, by the way.
Right.
So if you think about it, just a basic arpeggio, right? If you just did that, like soloing that way, it'd be kind of lame. It can be kind of boring. So a lot of people talk about like adding stuff. So it's basically like you have, you know, the chord tones are your sandwich bread, right? And the approaches are all the unbelievably good condiments you can add to whatever sandwich you are making. The simplest way of doing this is just taking a single chromatic note. So say you're on the 5, right? Oh, so instead of doing that, you go oh da da oh da 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 da, right? That in itself sounds like a little phrase, right? That's kind of fun, you know. Like you could actually solo on that, or if you did it from the other way, you know, like okay, cool, I can do it that way. Through doing these exercises, because we'll get into some factorials here. So we have 12 keys, right? Yeah. We have 12 basic chord types: major, minor, diminished, sus, augmented, blah, blah, blah. We have 4 chord tones. And then if you're utilizing chromaticism, there's 12 basic ways you can get to a note, either via combinations of single and double chromatic. So like a double chromatic would be if I was going to that G, for instance. I'm sorry, I'm singing an F concert because I'm a trumpet player. But if I'm going to that G, a double chromatic would be do do be dee da, right? Okay, and then or you can go boo do 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 do, right?
Right.
By the way, a minor pentatonic scale is basically a minor arpeggio with chromatic notes in it. So, but, you know, if we listen to Charlie Parker, who's like, and Charlie Parker, there is, you know, like I said earlier about the whole imitate, emulate, assimilate, innovate thing, I was like, there's one person that we should really, you know, emulate. And it is Charlie Parker, you know, because Charlie Parker is the bridge towards a modern improvised language. But if you take Charlie Parker's solos on rhythm changes, almost you can count how many times in the Charlie Parker Omni book he ends the phrase on an 8-bar of the A section on rhythm changes with well, what is that? That's a single chromatic note from above and a double chromatic from below to the third of a chord. So, what if you just practice that? You know, like there's these little tiny kernels of information that you could say, well, I transcribed it from Bird, but what did you transcribe? Like, that's another thing that we don't necessarily do. We'll learn all these solos, but we're never really analyzing what makes that solo so great.
Right.
And this is like something that you see it 50, 60 times in this solo, and you're like, well, there's a reason for that. There's a reason that he did that, because it's connective tissue. So chromatic approaches are like having cartilage. It allows you to do this. If you didn't have cartilage, that'd be very challenging. So if you just go, that's going to be a really boring solo. But if you went, that sounds kind of cool. It's like, oh my gosh, it's not rocket surgery. It really isn't. But we have to make exercises, I think, to make it applicable. So for anybody who is out there, I do a YouTube video on this. I have on my channel, which is mostly just me demonstrating horns that are in the shop. I do have, I think, 68 or 69 free little mini lessons, and one of them dives into this topic. And I can send you the link on email if you don't know it. And it's super great, because it's the gap that what I hear in musicians who don't know how to play bebop. And I'll play with guys in Kansas City. Now, Kansas City is a swing town. You would think it's a bebop town because Charlie Parker's from here, but Count Basie was, Count Basie's from New Jersey, but he got his professional start here in Kansas City, really. It's I can tell the people that know what I'm talking about, like with this stuff, and I can tell the people that haven't done it. And I think it's like, I have a hard time listening to those musicians who haven't done it. But if you listen to Chris Potter, or if you listen to, like Orrin Evans, or somebody like you could take even more avant-garde players, or players outside, like you listen to John Mayer. John Mayer knows chromaticism. And like literally, it's like, it's maybe not his thing, but he knows it. So, anyways. So
the way you had me do it, and I do with my students too sometimes, is you had me play, I think you just had me play a half step below the root on beat 4, right? So 4-1, 4-1, 4-1. And then once I could do that, then you did a half step above 4-1, 4-1, or whatever. And then you had me to go half step above, half step below, 4-1, 4-1. That's like a really basic way to do it. And then once I could do that, then you said, okay, let's do 2, right? 3 and 4 and 1. And then once I could do that, then now instead of aiming for the root, let's aim for the 3rd. And then instead of aiming for the 3rd, let's aim for the 5th.
Because most improvisers who are learning and starting out are reactionary players. In other words, they see the chord, they hear the chord, and then they react to said sound or said concept, mode, scale in their mind. Versus like Charlie Parker. Now, Charlie Parker, he was always an anticipatory player. In other words, when he was like in the height of his prowess in bebop era, and remember, his styling was relatively new. He would screw up rhythm sections all the time because he would be go, and he'd be like, he'd see the 2-5-1 or whatever, and he'd be like, he'd be inferring that sound 6 beats before it actually happened. So all of a sudden the rhythm section would go, oh no, he's here. And they go, oh, it would destroy things. But I think it's a great thing. Yeah, what you're talking about, like 4-1 or end of 4-1, is super valuable. Having your students like just being so confident enough to be like, I'm providing you this sound, I'm providing you this shape, and all of a sudden it happens. So I think that's a beautiful thing. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be any of that stuff. I mean, that all comes in time. And the speed comes with drill and repetition, I mean, that's, like you want to play fast. Well, you're going to have to practice slow for a long time, but you also have to then practice fast. I get irked when people say, well, if you want to play fast, you just have to practice slow. That's not true. You actually have to play fast too. You can't just expect to like instantly, oh, I played this, quarter note equals 60. Now I should be able to play a quarter note equals 280. That makes so much sense. So, you know,
You mentioned
anyways.
earlier your as we wrap this up. I think you and I could go all day, but I don't
Oh
think
man,
I don't.
I don't think the listeners want to hear that though.
So Bruce Brown, you said was the name of your middle school band director.
Yes.
What was so inspirational about him? You said he's a trumpet player.
Yes.
So I'm trying to connect.
And
I'm trying to connect that to what kids see as inspiration in their band directors, right? So,
yes. So I'll tell you, my first time I ever saw Bruce, he was my sisters. I have two older sisters, and they were doing a concert, and he played a trumpet solo. He had a shiny silver trumpet, so I was like, woo! I didn't even play trumpet at this time, and I thought it was awesome. The thing that Bruce has, and he still has, one, he's super positive. He's so happy to be in the moment. So I think, he's not taking any of his time for granted. He's deeply engaged with you as a person. I remember that so well, like in rehearsals, like he would, there might have been 50 of us in the room, but you only felt like there was one person.
yeah.
Like, and
I will say before you finish, I will say you got that from him, because you act that way too. You make anybody feel like they're the only one in the room, even if there's a lot of people around.
Oh, wow. That's really, it's because I'm scared of large crowds, and that's not, I'm not joking. So, I'm very intimidated in large social situations. A horn is a little bit of comfort, but otherwise I'm very awkward. Anywho, and then it's like, he was also one of these people that I remember being so like walk the walk, talk the talk. And that I say that all the time, but it was like, man, he would pick up his horn and play, and it was like the most glorious thing. And after he got done, and he could be playing guitar, or he could be playing, drums, or he could be playing bass, or playing the trumpet, and he had this zest and zeal, but this beam of light, this positivity, he's not showing off, he's inspiring. And it was like, so we would do these like, improv camps at his house. Nowadays with, like modern world, you couldn't do that. But, he would, we would sit outside, and in the summer, he would turn on the boom box. We'd play songs, and everybody would trade, choruses and eights and stuff. It was super fun. And then we'd take a break, and we'd shoot baskets, and eat Swiss Miss, it was just like, it's one of those moments when you're a kid. That was like that moment, like another one of those deep, ingraining, positive moments where I was like, I want to do that. I want to do that. And I think that's the joy. Maybe I was just oblivious to how hard that eventually the professional life would become. The grind, but he never seemed like, and man, Kyle, he would be going, like, we grew up in a district. So he would have to go to 3 schools a day,
Wow.
He'd drive from Corinna, then to Heartland, which is a 25-minute drive, and then drive to Etna, which is like an hour drive from there, all in one day, and then go and then teach lessons at night. I mean, it was like he had this energy and this stamina that there's no way I could do what he could do. And so, that's that inspiration that we get. And all 3 of my instructors, I was so fortunate that all 3 of them had that passion and and they were all positive. Jack Clifford would break everybody into jokes and make people laugh and make people feel comfortable. You gotta make, especially, like say middle school, such an impressionable age, and such a delicate age for everybody. I mean, everybody's sensitive when they're in middle school. You're still trying to feel, like out who you are, like in a very like elemental like phase. And those 2 people in particular had this just uncanny ability to make you feel comfortable, even if you were doing something incredibly awkward and highly embarrassing, potentially. Like taking an improvised solo in your jazz band when you don't know what you're doing. That's scary. That's literally scary. And they said, don't worry, we've got you. You might fall down, you might fall all of the time, and we got you. And I think that, that's so inspirational, because it's like, there are moments in every part of your day that you might have like one moment to hit that one particular, inspirational section for that young artist, and that might change their life. That might be like, wow. I think about all those directors, and there's some, like I'm in the business world now, and I feel like sometimes I'm sad because I don't get to have that experience as much anymore. That sort of like the light bulb turning on, the creative energy, like this, I get it sort of moment. Oh, that's power. That's joy and power. And I think, as a former educator, who occasionally dabbles still, I think that's what it's all about. That is what it's all about, for me at least.
Well, if you're missing that thrill, anytime you want to hop a plane up to Westbrook, you're welcome to share the podium with me.
I would love that. And I will. I've got a lot of miles to spend. So a trip to Maine is in my future. I just don't know exactly when, but hopefully it's soon. So I know I know this summer I'll be in Europe again with the UNH Jazz Band as their guest artist, just like Clark used to do. And that kind of freaks me out. Like last year I got to headline the Clark Festival.
Yeah.
And that was
awesome.
like it was one of the most freaky moments in my life, because I'm like, this is where I met Clark. I met Clark in 1992 at that festival, and now I'm that person. And I'm like, this is wrong. I don't belong on that stage. But it was an incredible thrill,
I think
so,
Clark would
very
disagree.
Fortunate.
Clark would disagree with you.
Well, I don't know. I hope the 20 I slipped him as a bribe might have helped.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.